We make mistakes all the time, and I've made lots and lots of mistakes during my career, and I've collected 12 things that I have, done wrong in the past when I have been photographing. And there's nothing wrong with making mistakes, but if we do not learn or try to avoid them and realize what the kind of like the mistakes can be that we can make, we won't get any better in photography. Hi, it's Peter here, and let's get right into the business. I have divided this into 4 different segments. The first one is the technical errors, then we talk about compositional mistakes that you might make, then we talk about the image editing part where you can make a lot of mistakes when you're editing the images, and then there is one which is really important, is the behavioral mistakes that you can make when you're doing street photographs. And let's start with the technical mistakes. In street photography, we always try to get that decisive moment, that perfect moment that something is happening and things are, in the right place. So many of us have used the burst mode, which I think is a very big mistake, because even though you can make 20 images per second, you still might not get the perfect moment, because it can be between those. Believe it or not, it can be between those two shots, even though you take like 20, 25 images per second. So try to learn not to use the burst mode. Try to be, of pre-visualizing the thing that when it's going to happen. You have to learn your reactions. If you just do that, you won't get any better, because then it's just pure luck if you got the shot what you wanted. It might take a little practice, but I assure you it's worth it. So don't use the burst mode. Incorrect camera settings. That is a very common mistake, that we don't set up our camera so that it's easy to use and fast, because street photography, we need to react quickly, and we can't start fiddling around with the settings when we photographing on the streets, action, the things that happen, someone enters the scene or something happens, people interact with each other. We need to be quick and fast in order to get the image. There's no time to start setting up the camera the way we think we need on that particular image. What I usually do is I have auto ISO, and then I set the aperture with the aperture ring on this particular camera, which has the lens has the aperture ring, and I set it up like that. If you adjust your aperture with the camera body, then do that. And I think it's just the best way to avoid the hassle and everything when you photograph. And also, if you have some special settings like the Ricoh GR3X has snap focus, distance, and all kinds of that, learn that and make the settings as simple as possible so that you can use them in any conditions. Sometimes I just like to make these a bit odd looking scenes where you don't really know what's going on. It's an outdoor ping pong table with, I don't know what's there in the back, but it's an interesting shot. And then one thing that is very common, especially when you're starting out and you're getting that fast prime lens, what you tend to do is to shoot wide open. And I think that's a big mistake in street photography. Of course, yes, bokeh has its place, but we're too fond of it. But in street photography, we want to see the surroundings. The background is important, and we want to see the context. We want to see the surroundings to tell a story. If it's just a photograph of a subject with blurry background, it doesn't really tell a story in most cases. Of course, if you're taking a street portraits, there might be times where bokeh is something and shallow depth of field is something that you need. But don't get into the kind of like a fashion of having really nice bokeh. It's not something that we want in street photography in most cases. 99% of time, very or a lot of depth of field is a lot better. I like to come to this place and document, and I came here because the light is really great right now, and it's not that common to see blue skies at this time of the year here in Helsinki. And I filmed this video on December 30th, so as you see, not much snow right now. Don't underestimate the importance of light. And this, of course, applies to any genre in photography because light gives us the mood, the feeling, and shapes the things. And shadows, of course, equally important because without light, we don't have any shadows. And without shadows, we don't really have any light. So that combination is really important. And if you have the possibility to photograph early in the morning or later at night, usually the light is a lot more interesting. And right now, if we turn a little bit, we can see the light is really low down and we got really long shadows, and the color of the light is a lot more interesting than in midday in summer. So embrace the different types of light, and don't forget artificial light too. Nighttime, you got neon signs, neon lights, all that can add feeling to your images. So it doesn't matter what you're photographing, always consider the light and think if that type of light fits the story of the image, the feeling, what the things that you are trying to tell with your photograph. That is really important, and I know that that is something that many of us don't understand or doesn't take into account enough. We really need the right type of light when we're photographing, and always or every time it's not possible to have that, but try to make the best of the light. And the next one is compositional errors, not being close enough. A lot of us are a little bit hesitating or maybe a little bit scared to do street photography, and we might be too far away from the subject itself and have loose compositions that, there is too much in the composition or inside the frame that we don't really know what the subject is. And of course, if you're making a story with several images, there might be, of course, one that is kind of like an establishing shot where we show more. In many cases, street photography is just one shot that tells a story. Having too much and too wide scenes might not be really interesting, or there might be a wide angle shot that there's nothing in the foreground so that there is some interesting magnet for the eye to catch on to the image and go inside the image, and there is no guidance for your eye to wander in the image, and it might be something that we just look at 1 second and go to the next one because it's not very interesting. So like Robert Capa, the famous war photographer, said once that if your images are not good enough, you might not be close enough, or you're not close enough, was actually the exact words. There is, of course, interpretation. What does it actually mean? And many say that you're not physically close enough, but it can also be that you're not emotionally close enough. But I'm not going to get into that debate, what it does mean, but get closer to get more interesting images. The next compositional mistake is that we ignore the background. I already talked a little bit about the background when I was talking about how to avoid shallow depth of field in street photographs, but this time it's about not having too cluttered background. Try to make the background as simple as possible, but only including elements that actually add to the story of an image. So you always have to look around the subject, what's behind the subject, so that it's separated from the background without using a shallow depth of field. And that's not really very easy. It's really hard to do that, and that's something that we really need to practice. So always look what's behind the subject, so that it will, first of all, not too cluttered, but it still gives context and the surroundings, and it adds to the story and the feeling and the emotion of the image. One big mistake is that we don't learn the basics of composition. We cannot neglect the basic thing. And the biggest mistake is to explain a photograph that I tried something different. And then if someone tells me that, I always ask, what is different from what? And if they can't tell me what the different is from something, then they're lost. You have to learn the basic rule of thirds, golden ratio, leading lines, and all that cliche stuff in order to break it, because of course when you break the kind of like the common rules, the photographs become more interesting. But if you don't know what you're doing, you don't have any consistency, or if you don't know the rules, then you don't have any consistency, you don't know what you're breaking, and it doesn't work. So learn the basics. I know it's a bit boring, but that's the only way to be better is to learn the basics, and then you know what to break to make the images more interesting.
And the third part is about editing and editing errors. Editing is a big part of photography and also a big part of street photography too. But we can do two things wrong. We can over-edit or we can under-edit. And over-editing is something that we might do if we start playing around with too many filters and adding too much saturation and getting rid of elements in the photograph with AI or something like that. Or under-editing is something that we might do and just use images straight out of camera. Of course, straight out of camera can be sometimes very useful, but then we edit the images in camera by using different kinds of film simulations. That is image editing too, because it alters the scene to a certain look. And my policy in image editing is that I try to make the image look the way I felt when I was taking the image, not necessarily how the place looked when I was making the image, because I'm not doing a documentary in a strict sense of documentary. I'm towards more about artistic interpretation of the scene, and then the feeling is one of the biggest things. But I never take out anything from the image. If it's there, it's going to stay. I might dodge and burn so that some elements might be not that visible by darkening some parts of the image and then brightening the things around the subject or something like that, but never take out anything. And that is my policy on that. If you like to edit and take stuff out, that's totally fine if it is in artistic context. If it's a documentary, then I wouldn't do that at all. But don't over-edit your images, and always remember to edit a bit so it's not under-edited.
And before we get into the last one, a reminder, there will be an extra tip after the fourth section of this video. And the fourth section is the behavioral mistakes. One common mistake is overthinking. A lot of us overthink the image. We start, overanalyzing while we're making the photographs, and that usually leads to hesitation. And when we hesitate, we freeze and we won't press the shutter button at the right moment. Then we miss a shot. But, we all do that sometimes. But try to learn to be quick and not overanalyze. Just make the image and think later. That's my advice, so that we can get over that overthinking, so that it's not blocking us making the images, because nothing is worse than missing the shots all the time, and then you start feeling bad if you miss shots all the time. Of course, sometimes we do that, but practicing and practicing and practicing will make us think less when we photograph. It's kind of like a subconscious way of making photographs. We just kind of know that something's going to happen, and that will come from experience. So learn and shoot a lot, then you will kind of like get over that overthinking. And not being in the middle of the action. One big mistake what we make in street photographs is that we're not in the action. We're on the sidelines, and we on the side, and we don't get into the action to get those emotions and get those expression of people's faces, so that we have a better story. If we just walk around and just observe from a distance, we won't get those emotional shots which shows the story and the emotion. So try to get into the action, and of course that requires a little bit of courage and not to hesitate, and not being afraid of being among people. If that is a problem for you, like it has always been a problem for me a little bit, just in most cases people don't even realize that you're photographing. They don't kind of realize that you're making images. And I do have a video about that. I think it's on this side anyways, about how to be invisible and how to be so that you can make those images without people even noticing it. You might want to watch that video if you're hesitating with or are a little bit intimidating and afraid of being among people and photographing. But get into the action to get the shots. The lack of patience. This is very common, that we just walk too fast and we don't look around, and we're not patient enough. sometimes you see a scene, you see a place where you pre-visualize something, okay, that something's going to happen here. If this and that comes into the frame, it might be a good photograph. Then just wait the thing to happen. Of course, don't wait too long so that you won't miss the next spot. But what really happens is that I always say that you need to be quick, but you need to be quick when the thing happens. But sometimes you need to be patient to wait that something might happen. We make a lot of soulless and not so meaningful images. Try to pick up a project to avoid, taking meaningless photographs. It doesn't matter what the project is, because if you have a project, you always have something to photograph and you have some kind of a consistency. And also, having a project is a way to get started when you go out and photograph. If you don't have any projects or any ideas when you go out and photograph, you just walk around and take meaningless photographs that are, nothing, and you won't get any better at photography if you don't concentrate on some specific thing. And when you have the starting point and the specific thing to start with, it doesn't matter if you end up somewhere else. You might see something else, because if you have, let's say, that yellow cars or umbrellas or anything like that, you will see those, but then you start seeing something else too and find something else. Start a project or some kind of a theme when you start photographing, and that will get you going. And here are some more videos about street photography. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching, and bye for now.